Good morning, Amanda Kalczynska, and this is World Talks, where we'll take a look at the upcoming talks between Ukraine, Russia, and US officials in Riyadh on a ceasefire in Ukraine. It could be the decisive moment for the three parties' discussion in Riyadh following yesterday's consultations with the Ukrainian part. It's time for the American and Russian delegations to hit another round of talks. US Special Envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, shows optimistic, praising productive conversations with the Russians about lasting peace, quote unquote. But will they bring real progress? To elaborate on the prospects for a cessation of hostilities and for a lasting peace in Ukraine in a long term, I'm joined now by Vira Konstantynova, former foreign policy advisor to the chairman of the parliament in Ukraine. Expert in international relations, former foreign policy, Mrs. Konstantynova is a well-known expert on Ukraine's foreign policy, geopolitics and international security. Good morning, madam. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So I understand that not only Steve Witkoff spoke of productive convos, Rustem Umerov also wrote yesterday that the Ukrainian delegation had a productive discussion focused on energy and Black Sea security. So it's clearly a sign of good faith in the negotiations. But the Russian drones keep falling on Kiev. So what does it tell you of the Russian attitude toward a peace deal?
Unfortunately, I should say that I'm so skeptical regarding the intentions from Russian side to achieve a peace right now. But nevertheless, let's wait for outcomes of negotiations between the Russian side and American side. By the way, according to updates that I received from Ukrainian media, this meeting would be also closed meeting. So in terms of agreements that could be reached, it's a very important part right now to follow all updates and statements from one side. From other side, there is a huge, I would say, aspirations, because indeed we still are witnessing the drone strikes, recent attacks on Kiev, and we're also witnessing that Ukrainian people are dying due to Russian attacks. So we need to stop this, obviously, and President Trump declared his intention to do this. But at the same time, there is a lack of I would say confidence-building measures, because Russia is still not showing any progress in these terms. Because since, I would say, March 11, we are in talks, and still both sides agreed to the ceasefire, temporary ceasefire, but still Russia attacks Ukraine with drones and missiles.
Steve Witkoff seems to pursue a hard line of policy which says enough of this carnage, stop the bloody war, without, however, naming the perpetrator. So is this a negotiation tactic? What could be the consequence of equating the executioner with the victim?
I would say that we need to achieve a long-lasting peace. I mean, from the Ukrainian perspective as a victim of this aggression. And at the same time, we have United States of America as a mediator. And in these terms, I can accept the, negotiation tactics like this. But at the same time, we need to understand, I would refer to the latest interview by Mr. Witkoff to Mr. Tucker, where there is a huge, concerns in Ukraine devoted to the messages that were produced there. But at the same time, if we think like in strategic way, I believe that this message is totally in terms of negotiation tactics that had been chosen by the Trump administration from one side, and from the other side, Mr. Witkoff already had made some corrections in terms of that. Everything that he produced in terms of messaging, it was like a position that he heard from the Russian side. That's a problem, because in terms of, the real consensus, the real common ground, I would say, for stopping the war, we need to have some kind of understanding from Russian side that Ukraine is a sovereign and independent state, and our territorial integrity, our sovereignty should prevail in any discussions. But at the same time, we heard from Mr. Witkoff the real perception. And by the way, there is an interesting article I've heard by them, one of the ideologists of Russian regime, so for French media, where it's obvious that Russia is not ready for any peace deal or any ceasefire agreement, despite their manipulations on this regards.
All right, let's touch upon now the security measures for long-term peace for Ukraine. Steve Witkoff dismissed the idea of sending European peacekeeping forces to Ukraine, calling it simplistic, and called the Europeans' fear of Russia going further as preposterous. So what if the Americans are wrong?
I'm pretty sure that it's what Mr. Witkoff had heard from the Russian side. And of course, there is an absolute contradiction if we talk about the recent developments on the European track. I mean, in terms of defense spending, in terms of budget, defense budget, and the idea of peacekeeping missions or monitoring mission. It's a very great idea in order to support and ensure the ceasefire agreement, even on temporary basis. But at the same time, there is a statement from Ukrainian side that we are not in favor of the idea of so-called UN peacekeeping mission, because we can understand and we are witnessed the effectiveness of such a mission if it would be sponsored or co-sponsored by the one of the permanent members, that is Russia is still in the US Security Council. So in these terms, I would say that we need to push with the idea of European-led peacekeeping mission due to several factors. First of all, it's our common security goal. I mean, both Ukraine and Europe. And at the same time, only our responsibility is to construct European security architecture based on the lessons learned from the Ukrainian war.
So what would happen if the US staunchly opposed the European and more broadly the coalition of the Willings initiative of sending troops to Ukraine?
I believe that we would have a limited participation of the US in the negative scenario. But in the same time, I think that it's still too early to think about the modalities. Currently, the processes and negotiation process are ongoing. But in terms of practical solutions, I believe that we need to think about not only European option, but also about the involvement of countries that are trusted. As we have already heard from different, statements made by Asian countries like China, we need to think about the broader coalition as well. But we need to understand that this peacekeeping mission, it's not the solution. That would be a temporary solution for a ceasefire agreement. We need to think broadly in terms of long-lasting peace, whether it would contribute to this goal or not. So in terms of global solidarity, I would say, we need to suggest in several steps broader. So I believe that the American side would support partly in limited motion, but at the same time, I think that we need to have some kind of broader discussion. I mean, both Ukraine, European side, as well as Western partners like South Korea, because we need to have, China or Japan, we need to have a one vision. So in this regards, I'm a bit skeptical right now, because currently there is only the European track in this regards.
All right, let's focus now on the negotiations taking part on also the military and maritime ceasefire. One of the key topics in the talks is the maritime ceasefire to facilitate trade in the Black Sea. So how important is this for Ukraine's economy and war effort?
I would say that it's it's very crucial for Ukraine and for our GDP because, as you probably know, Ukraine is using the marine routes for export, not only agrarian or metal products, but also in huge sense. So we need to deblock our ports and the ability to receive vessels from different countries to operate in normal way of life. But again, we have a problem with that also because Russian missile strikes on our facilities, port facilities, that is caused a huge damage. So we need to think about the restoration of our facilities as well. Currently, there is an initiative, Grain from Ukraine. There are a lot of initiatives that I would say have a great impact on global stability. Despite the war, Ukraine is still a reliable partner for many countries all around the globe. But at the same time, there is an issue with manipulation because the Russian fleet possesses a great challenge to Ukraine's security, marine security. So we need to have a long stability ceasefire there. I think that it's important step forward, but again, back to the idea of stopping missile strikes and drone strikes on Ukraine, there is a huge issue of critical infrastructure because ports facilities, it's a critical infrastructure, and we need to ensure that these facilities would be in safe mode in order to conduct economic operations and trade. But there is a huge skepticism from my side because for Russia, there is one of the goals of this war is to ensure that Ukraine will not able to trade and, of course, not to be able to receive some kind of leverage in order to sponsor its armed forces. Because, as you probably know, we, as the citizens and our state budget, that's the only route and the only source for our Ukrainian armed forces. So we need this for our stability and resilience.
The US has resumed military aid and intelligence sharing after a brief pause following tensions between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. So how crucial is this support for Ukraine's ability to sustain operations on the front lines?
I wouldn't manipulate to say that it's not crucial. That's true. That's important for our survival and resilience to receive the military and intelligence support from the American side. But of course, I'm a bit optimistic in terms of European contributions. And as I've heard from the statements made by our European colleagues, there is a huge consensus that we need to find alternative in order to support Ukrainian efforts of self-defense. So I believe that it's one of the additional instruments also in terms of negotiating tactics that our American side could use against the Russian delegation. Because currently, as you probably know, because of this pause, there is not a huge changes on the battlefield because of the interesting solution that have suggested by our European colleagues as well as Ukrainians. So Ukraine is still work on the solutions because we understand we need to be self-defensive, and we need to have alternative sources for our resilience. So in these terms, I think that it's also one of the directions of the discussion, but it's not the main one.
All right, and to quickly, as we need to wrap up, what should be the strategy of Ukraine in dealing with both the US and Russia currently in this situation?
One statement, we should rely on ourselves, and we would rely on ourselves. We relied on ourselves since February 2022 on the first days of aggression. So that's a strategy. And I believe that it could be a strategy for all our European partners. And then we can say about the alliances.
Vira Konstantynova, thank you so much for joining us this morning to elaborate on the current status of negotiations about the ceasefire in Ukraine. And that concludes this edition of World Talks, but please stay tuned to TVP World for more coverage as World News Online is coming up.